probably would have been a bit brutal having sort of people under the age of 10 running around committing sort of bug genocides. Hi platform, my name is Femi Fadugba and I'm the author of The Upper World, a book about love, violence and the physics of time travel. Today I'm here to talk about my favorite sci-fi book to film adaptations. Okay, so my first sci-fi book to film adaptation is Ender's Game. So Asa Butterfield plays Ender, the lead role in this. It's in the future, sort of sci-fi dystopian universe where the enemy is a creature of bugs, a civilization of bugs basically that live in the far end of the universe. In the future they use kids to sort of train up. I think kids will have more malleable minds and kind of work better with the interfaces of war. And so Ender's like the lead candidate and he's identified very quickly that this kid's special. He's got everything that's needed to save humanity, essentially. And so he has that massive pressure on his shoulders as a young kid, while at the same time dealing with the system and institution, I think, sort of militaristic institution that is ready to exploit him. And so it's just quite interesting. On the one hand, as a viewer, or reader, you're sort of wanting humanity to win and wanting Ender to win. On the other side, you get this eerie feeling that something's not quite right and that he's being influenced. So I don't know how much I want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but when you see those two tensions collide in a way that's sort of really satisfying but also really shocking, I thought they did that really well, both in the book and the film. I remember reading the book and just being floored by the characterization, specifically Ender, Valentine and Peter, the three siblings, who I still think are probably the sort of most badass trio of teenage siblings I've seen on a page. All of them really, really sharp, very different personalities, and Ender probably being the sort of the pinnacle of the best of his siblings in a way. I think the film did actually a pretty good job. I thought it was interesting that they aged up the kids. Probably would have been a bit brutal having sort of people under the age of 10 running around committing sort of bug genocides. I think it'd be incredible if they could do the sequels as well, Speaking for the Dead. Obviously with the film format you get more visuals, so it's quite satisfying to see the world that Orson Scott Card had written about on screen. The fight scenes, the way they built that into the film, I thought that was quite clever as well. I think one thing that the film missed out on, which I think films always miss out on, just because of the format, is just the inner life of the characters. Probably my favorite bits of Ender's Game was just him thinking through the kind of game theory, psychology of how he was going to approach different situations, and sort of just saying, look, if I do this, then tomorrow I'll have to face this outcome, but if I do this, it'll end all wars. I mean, they do reflect on this a little bit in the film, but I just think they go into his psychology in a way that was just super interesting. Next up is Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. This short story actually played a significant role in terms of how I thought about The Upper World as well, because it is a book about time travel and also a book about sort of how time travel occurs psychologically. The short story is about a scientist, and she works in linguistics, and then all of a sudden an alien species arrives, and the book is very, at times quite dense in terms of like going into like the detailed science of linguistics and also the detailed science of relativity. And so I just really enjoyed how kind of clever it was, to be honest. I learned a ton about language. It's something that we're kind of doing all the time, speaking, but it's interesting how little we know about how it actually works and how language influences the way we conceive reality, full stop. Yeah, and the film I think did a really good job. The star is Amy Adams, and incredible actress, and she carries that storyline from the book, and they kind of expand on a few elements. It's not like Independence Day in the sense that the aliens stay in the background for pretty much the entire movie, and it focuses on the main characters' one-to-one interaction with a couple of alien species. And so you still get that element of the book where you get to see that conversation and somebody figuring out how to communicate with someone they have zero common ground with. And you're watching the whole time thinking, how would I approach this problem as well if you had no sort of basis to start from? The other thing I appreciate about Arrival was, and the book as well, is just the approach that it takes to time travel. Yeah, I think the other thing I appreciate about the book is the fact that it was written in first person. The core basis of Einstein's theory of relativity is that everything is relative. And so there's no such thing as some person out there, some sort of objective third-person observer out there who has a bird's eye view of everything that's going on. Everything is actually somewhat subjectively experienced and subjective. You know, time flows at one place over here, but it flows at another place over there. There's not one big grandfather clock that's ticking and setting time for everyone. So I thought that was quite a clever choice in terms of making it first person, just to almost drive that point home, that time and this story is subjective. So my next pick is Dune. Dune is an interesting one. In one sense, I think it took me a long time to get into this book. People might disagree with me on this, but I think it has quite a slow start. There's a lot of world building. You're not sure what it's leading up to, in a way. At least I wasn't. I think from sort of halfway through the book and onwards, it was just incredible. The payoff, especially at the end, I mean, to this day, I'd say it's still the best sci-fi book of all time. And I think there's quite a lot of people who agree with that. And I remember listening to a podcast at one point, they were talking about Frank Herbert and how much research he'd done into religion, for instance. I think he was a keen student of Islam, and you can see that throughout the book, just in terms of the names of the characters and the places, and it's kind of weaved in. But I think there's only a few people who have built a world that big and that comprehensive, where it's not just you coming up with different names of towns and people, but you're also talking about the different theologies and ways of viewing life. It's that sort of in-depth. I mean, obviously Star Wars is probably maybe the only other example I think I've seen. Dune follows a boy named Paul, who's separated from his parents. And I think from the beginning you get the impression that this boy's a special kid. He's part of a prophecy, and his mum is also part of a sort of sect of people who can have special insight into things, let's say. He essentially gets stranded on a desert island, incredibly dry, and he's fighting A, to survive, but B, to also find a way to save his family and his people. And in that process, he starts almost growing into his destiny. And I think it's just the way that sort of evolution happens, where he finds a brand new group of people who believe in him in a way that he's never believed in himself, and you see what he becomes was quite powerful. And it continues over multiple books in the series as well. So I'm cheating a little bit here, because the film will have come out by the time I think this is released, but hasn't come out as of me speaking right now. But I'm almost going a little bit off the trailer, which is probably the most incredible trailer for a film I've ever seen in my life. Dune has actually been made into a film, I think, twice before as well. The second one I saw, it was a decent effort, but I think a lot of people are waiting for this one to actually live up to the full potential of the book. Yeah, I think the challenge of turning something like Dune into a feature film is there's just so much story, and there's just so much world. When you're doing that, you have to be incredibly intelligent about which bits you pick and which bits you drop. My guess is one of the things they'll do is make it really quite long, which a lot of action films are these days, I guess. One thing that they clearly gotten right is the cast. The main character is Timothée Chalamet, I think I'm saying that right. Zendaya's in there, Batista, and also Jason Momoa. So just some serious heavy hitters. The Upper World follows 16-year-old Esso, a kid who is wedged between two friendship groups. On the one side, he's got a group of mates who are sort of piss-taking, fun-loving kids, and on the other side, he's got a group of friends who are like mostly ganged off and drawing him into life and death situations. Then you got Nadia, the girl in the front row of his class at school, who he's trying to figure out a way to tell her that he's been obsessed with her for as long as they've known each other. So one morning he's running to catch the 36 to school in Peckham, and he sees a kid about to get run over. And so he decides, I'm gonna try and save him. And in the act of pushing the kid out of the way of a 4x4, he gets hit himself. And he gets knocked out, not only out of consciousness, but out of reality as we know it. And he enters the upper world. Now, the upper world is this place where reality appears the way that physics describes it. So something like time. In the upper world, he can see his whole life from birth to death, just laid out in front of him with everything in between. And while he's up there, he actually steps into one of these kind of projections and sees the end of his day. And it's not good. He kind of sees bullets streaming through the air coming for himself and all of his mates as well, and all the people he knows and cares about. So anyway, he falls out of the upper world, and he's back in our normal 3D world, and realizes he has till the end of the day to avoid this catastrophe that he's seen and to save everyone he knows and kind of loves. And little does he know, a generation later, his future self is trying to do the exact same thing, and has gotten the help from a girl named Ria, this football playing prodigy and soon to be kind of hidden physics genius, who has similar interests in changing the outcome of that night. So yeah, it's a book about love, violence, and the physics of time travel that just so happens to be set in Peckham. Thanks for joining. If you have any thoughts about sci-fi adaptations, please just leave them in the comments. And also please subscribe to Platform for more bookish videos.